another book review. What's up? They're back because I'm running out of ideas to vlog. I mean, no, the vlogs are staying, but I wanted to do this video because I love reading. As you could tell by my first 2 videos that I posted, I love reading, and I can be kind of
crazy
when it comes to reading. So yeah, today's video we're gonna talk about every single Sarah J. Maas book that I've read, which is all of them. Now you're probably wondering, Erin, why have you read every single Sarah J. Maas book? Don't you have anything else to do with your time? Well, the answer is no, I don't. So we're gonna talk about them. The first series that we're gonna tackle is ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses. So this book series is what got me into Sarah J. Maas and like fantasy books, period. I highly recommend it for anyone who sort of wants to like dip their toe into fantasy, because fantasy, there's a lot of layers and there's a lot of world building, and it can sometimes be kind of confusing, but this book series is actually very easy to digest. Especially the very first book. The very first book is very easy to digest. It's very easy to follow along. There's not a whole lot of world building until these 2 books, A Court of Mist and Fury and A Court of Wings and Ruin. As you can see, they're pretty hefty. And that's because there's a lot more world building in those 2 books. Those 2 books are very more complex than the first one, but because the first one sort of gives you sort of the bare bones of the whole storyline, it's very easy to follow with the next 2 books, sort of this world building. So yeah, and then basically with A Court of Thorns and Roses, there are 5 books in the series, but really only 3. That's really confusing, but like these 3 are the core books in the series. This is like the storyline. These 2 books are just kind of supplemental. A Court of Frost and Starlight is actually 200 pages. You can read this in a day. Look how big the font size is. Yeah, you can read this in a day, and it's just like supplemental, like their life after the main plot, if that makes sense. And that goes for the same for A Court of Silver Flames. This one, really hefty, and is not about the main characters at all. This book mainly just deals with a lot of the side characters and like their lives after the main plot, gets resolved, if that makes sense. So these 2 are very supplemental, and you really don't have to read them if you don't want to, but these 3 are the ones you sort of have to read and make the most sense. It's not my favorite book series from Sarah J. Maas, but I do like it, and I do like the premise of it. This book, the very first book, A Court of Thorns and Roses, gives Beauty and the Beast vibes, if that makes any sense. Like the main character basically gets sucked in to this other world and has to live with her captor, and then ends up falling for her captor, capturer, whatever. It gives Beauty and the Beast vibes, if like that's what you're into. And then the second book, A Court of Mist and Fury, it goes more into detail, obviously, and there's more world building in this, which I really liked, but it reverses a lot of what was said in the first book, if that makes sense. So like once you finish reading the first book, you'll have your opinions about all of these characters, and then once you go into the second book, those opinions will quickly be changed because she does a switch up. Sara does a switch up. And then A Court of Wings and Ruin does a lot more world building as well, but just like, again, very thick, but sums up everything from the second book. So like the second book she does a switch up, and then this book just ties it all in with like a nice pretty bow. And I think that's why I like Sarah J Maas. I mean, my opinions of her are conflicted, but what I do like what she does with all of her stories and series is you'll go in and read the first book and you'll have an opinion about that first book, and once you dive deeper into all of these series, she gets more in depth and detailed, and it's just like you are just like, wait, what? Like, she does a lot of switch ups, and then so it's like characters you think would end up together actually don't end up being together, and it's crazy. Or you think the story has this one specific plot, but as you continue reading the books in the series, you realize, oh, that's not the plot at all. It's actually something else, and it's just like, I don't know, that's what I sort of like about it is I'm pleasantly, well, no, I take that back. I'm not always pleasantly surprised, but I'm always surprised, and it just like, I don't know, it adds to like the need to read more, if that makes sense. Speaking about surprises, my next book series that I'm gonna talk about from Sarah J Maas is the Throne of Glass series. Let me see actually if I can even pick up the book series. Give me a minute. Hold on. You have to see this. Okay. This is Throne of Glass. Yay. There's like 8 books to this series, and this is where you go, Erin, you really are insane. It's my favorite book series ever by her, and I say that with my chest, and I don't think you can ever change my opinion of that. This is also the second series I read from Sarah J Maas. So when I read A Court of Thorns and Roses first, and then I got into this book series. And what I like about this book series is how crazy complex it is. Like, it's actually really insane. There's like 8 books, and then, you know, if you do your research, there are multiple different ways you can read this. There are multiple different orders in which you can read this. And what I mean by that is, so Throne of Glass, the Throne of Glass series starts off with the first book called Throne of Glass, right? And then we have A Court of Midnight, or Crown of Midnight. We have Crown of Midnight, Heir of Fire, Queen of Shadows, Empire of Storm, Tower of Dawn, Kingdom of Ash, right? So that's the main books. Well, now we have this guy, the Assassin's Blade. This guy is the prequel to the Throne of Glass series. And she wrote this and published this in the middle of writing the Throne of Glass series. So this explains a lot of the main character's backstory, her life before the Throne of Glass series. You know, her life leading up to her life in here. Perfect, wonderful, right? No. So if you Google it and do your research, there are multiple different ways in which you can read this series. You could do it in book publishing order, or you could do it in book chronological order, so you can start with Assassin's Blade first and then get into Throne of Glass, but really you're not going to be surprised. There's no element of surprise, and in my mind with this book series, you need to have that element of surprise so you can read Throne of Assassin's Blade after reading Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight. All right, before Heir of Fire, which is what I did, which explained a lot. This was the third book that I read in the series, and it was a nice pause from what I was about to get into because, like I said, this book series is not what you think it is. When you read Throne of Glass, you think the main character is an assassin, which is true. She is an assassin. But as you continue reading throughout this series, it's way more complex and deeper than just an assassin that gets caught killing people, you know? And before you get into the book where stuff really does go down, this was really refreshing and like filled in quite a bit of the gaps that there are with the first two books in the series and foreshadow a lot about what's supposed to come in Kingdom of Ash, right? Okay, so that's the way I read it. I highly recommend reading it that way too, but honestly, and there are a million other ways in which you can read this series, so go with what your heart's desire. But please, for the love of everything that is good in this world, do not read this before Throne of Glass.
Please.
It'll ruin the surprise, and then you won't like it. And who wants a horrible surprise? No one. Then, okay, once you read that, and then you read Heir of Fire, you then have to read Queen of Shadows, which is honestly so insane. This book is literally crazy, but I love it so much. It's like this entire book is just straight adrenaline. It's straight adrenaline. I was like on the edge of my seat the whole time. I don't think I put this book down once. Actually, I know I didn't. Anyways, so you read about 85% of the book series. There are 3 books left in this series, right? We have Empire of Storm, Tower of Dawn, and then of course, this hefty boy, Kingdom of Ash. Well, you could read them separately, but why on earth would you do that? Why? So, if you, again, Google this book series, there are reading guides. Not only are there guides to how to read the books in order, but there are a specific reading guide for both Empire of Storm and Tower of Dawn. Why, you may ask? Because you're supposed to read them at the same time. It's a tandem read. You're supposed to read both of these big boys at the same time. So what that means is I followed a reading guide that I found off the internet, so you're like supposed to read like 3 chapters of Empire of Storm and then 2 chapters of Tower of Dawn. And now you're wondering, that's literally so insane. And now you're like, okay, you are really crazy, Erilyn. This is really making sense. But then you're also like, okay, why do I need to read them at the same time? Because the events that are happening in both of these books are happening at the same time in the timeline. In this book, we have the main character and like a few other side characters, and they go on their own like little quest, adventure, journey, right? Well, while they're going on their little quest, another side character is taking a side quest, and his side quest is happening at the same time as this side quest. You see, so it really they're supposed to be read together because there's so much world building and information that's being uncovered by both of these characters in these 2 books that really you have to read them together. I recommend doing the tandem read because This book is really good, like really good. This book literally sucks. Literally. I don't know why Sarah J. Maas wrote like an 800-page book about this like horrible side character in this series. Sorry. These are my opinions, by the way. If you've read the book series, you know what I'm talking about. It's just like there's a horrible side character in this book series that she writes an 800-page book on. It's horrible. It's not like there is no like climax. There is no like adrenaline rush in this book. It is just 800 pages of this one character just complaining the whole time and going on like a self-help journey, which is what he needed. This was really good for his character arc, but so incredibly boring. Like, oh my God, it was so boring. So it's like, if you don't do the tandem read, then you're stuck reading an 800-page book with no like pizzazz at all. Because this has all the pizzazz, and this has all of the boring stuff that happens in books. So it's like, it's a good trade-off. It's a good, they balance each other out. So like, I really highly recommend doing the tandem read. It's not that hard. You could mark the pages in the book, or you could do what I did and just like not do that, and it's not as bad as it seems, honestly. It really isn't. But regardless, you can't escape Tower of Dawn. You really can't. As boring as it is, there are a few key things that go down in this book that are important to the overall, story. So it's like, you can't just skip this book and go to Kingdom of Ash, because there are going to be some things that you just don't make sense to you, and so you need to read this book regardless. So it's like, just do the tandem read, honestly, because it's really boring, minus like 3 parts of this book, but like, you don't get to those parts anytime soon. It's just so slow. It's so slow. I hate Tower of Dawn. With a passion. I hate it, but like, you needed to read it, right? Anyways, finally, I mentioned this book earlier in my very first YouTube video, Kingdom of Ash. This is one of my favorite books of all time, and it's ginormous. Like I said, it's almost 1,000 pages. It's like 990 pages long, something crazy like that. And this just sums up everything that's been going on in this series. Like, this is her longest series. She's really painted a very clear picture of what's going on. And so obviously you need like a 1,000-page book to finish the story. It ties up a lot of loose ends, and it just like, Sarah does a really good job with her final books, just tying everything in a bow and just tying up those loose ends and ending it. Unfortunately, the final books are always incredibly massive because of like all of the world building that she's done. Like, you can't just be like, and they live happily ever after. Like, no, that's not how that works. And like I said in my previous video, Kingdom of Ash it mixes war and politics and romance, and that's what this Throne of Glass series honestly just does. It's about this assassin. I don't want to give too much away, so I'm not going into details about the plot in any of these books to keep this video short and sweet, but this book series really does mix war, politics, like international relations, and like romance and the fantasy aspects, because what makes it fantasy is they're all just like fairies with magical powers, but it's a war between 2 kingdoms essentially, and so there's a lot of like going into detail about the conflicts and why they're fighting, and the detail of like all of the fighting, but then also the politics that go into wars. If any of you guys are taking Global Media 445, like, you'll understand that like wars are never as easy as they are portrayed in the media, and they are not easy in this book series. They're very complex in general, and it's a very complex war that's going on in this book series. So this, in the past like 7 books you read, it's just those 7 books are just leading up to the big war, and this is the big war, plus just ending the book series in general. So it's really good. It's really long, but it's really good. It's like, I know I keep saying that, and my cousin keeps making memes out of it, but it really, chef's kiss. When I finished this book series, I was actually really sad because I had nothing to look forward to. But don't worry, I quickly found the next book series in Sarah J. Maas to read, which is our next book series, which is Crescent City. This is not my favorite book series of hers either. If I had to rank them, I'd do Throne of Glass, ACOTAR, and then Crescent City. I don't know, there's just like, after reading Throne of Glass though, I will say every other book series just lacked, in my opinion, from just like the imagery, the detail, the plot in general. But what I do like about Crescent City is it is set in more of a modern time. With ACOTAR and Throne of Glass, it's very much like, it gives medieval vibes, you know? But Crescent City is actually set in like modern times. So they have like laptops, computers, iPhones, all of that good stuff. Cars, they have cars, all of that kind of stuff. And again, it's about fairies. It's sort of about a fairy and an archangel, a fallen angel, and it's like a mystery. The fairy is the main character, and they are trying to solve a murder. Very fun, very cool. And the first book they solve the murder, and the second book they go a little bit into detail about what happens after the murder. So the first book is called Crescent City, A House of Earth and Blood, and then the second book is called Crescent City, A House of Sky and Breath. I'm not going to get into the houses because it is also very complex too. Like, all of these creatures, I guess you can say, in this book series, they're all mythical creatures, and they all come from certain houses. So like, we have House of Earth and Blood, House of Sky and Breath, and then House of Flame and Shadow, and that's just like how all of these mythical creatures are categorized. Their houses are like their categories. But in the first book, like I said, it's like a murder mystery, and they solve it, but at the end of the book, it leaves you on a cliffhanger, and like leaves you with a bunch of questions, because it just, again, the plot isn't what you think it is. The plot is way more deeper than it really is. And so this goes a little bit more into depth about like the cliffhanger and some of the questions that you might have, and like goes a little bit way deeper into the actual plot. This also leaves you on a cliffhanger. This book was insane. This book was insane. I was actually really excited to read the third book. This really amped me up for the third and final book in this book series. I believe there's only 3 books. We'll see. There could always be more. And now you're probably thinking, why did this book get you so excited? Well, that's because the characters in ACOTAR make a cameo in this, which means the characters in ACOTAR make a cameo in the third and final book, A House of Flame and Shadow. And yes, so there's a crossover. Okay, now I have to talk about the crossover. Oh my god. Imagine the Sarah J. Maas world as a multiverse. Think of it like Avengers. I hate to be comparing Avengers to a fantasy book series directed to women. Men can read this too, but let's be honest, it's for women. But it is like Avengers. Every book series has its own universe, but it's a multiverse. And so in this book, she explains more about how there are different worlds and different timelines in the universe, right? And those timelines are like overlapping. So like, for example, the timeline in Crescent City is overlapping kind of with the timeline in Actar, and the same with the timeline in Throne of Glass. Like, it's our own worlds, but like the timelines are overlapping. So when you open up portals, you open up portals to their universes, their timelines, right? And that's what sort of... Pause. I'm not going to say more into that because I would be spoiling the book. But basically, they do a little bit of portal jumping, and they do a crossover, kind of like what we saw in Endgame in Avengers. But wait, so there's a cameo and there's like a crossover with those two book series. But there's also, hold on, I'm finding it. There's also a crossover with Throne of Glass. It's not as obvious of a crossover as it is with these two book series because there's actually interaction, but in The Court of Mist and Fury, there is literally a brief, super brief cameo, the main character in Throne of Glass. Like, so brief that it goes over your head. But once you've read these two book series, you'll get it. You'll get it. It'll click with you. Like, you'll get it. But it's not as obvious of a crossover at all as it is with these two. And that's what got me so hyped. This book talks a lot about, this book series in general talks a lot about the different universes and all of that kind of stuff. So it's very interesting, but what I don't really like about this book series is how much world building, because with Actar and Throne of Glass, you get a lot of world building later on in the series, like it's spread out, but you get all of the world building in the very first book. So it's a very slow paced, the first Crescent City book is very slow paced, a little bit confusing at times because of all of the world building just crammed into this book to explain the whole like world that is Crescent City. So you just pull through and get through the first book, and then the second and third are much more fast paced. There is more kind of world building. There is additional world building in the other two books, but not as much as it is in the very first one. So it's not that confusing. But yeah, that's what I really kind of don't like about Crescent City, is it's kind of very complicated right off the bat, and it kind of very confusing, and so you sort of have to like stop, pause, look in the back because there's like a glossary, and sort of figure that out. But yeah, this is kind of crazy. Can you tell I'm crazy?